Hey everyone, Shark here bringing you a Genshin guide for everything you need to know about Mavuika, the Pyro Archon and ruler of Natlan. Mavuika is an extremely powerful damage dealer, but she's not without her limitations, some of which make her very hard to use effectively. That's why in this video we'll go over how Mavuika works, including the mechanics that make her very different from other characters, and then I'll give you a breakdown of her best weapons, artifacts, teammates, constellations, special techniques you can use while playing her, and much more. Make sure to like the video if it helps and share it with anyone who has questions about Mavuika. And while you're at it, sub to the channel for Shark Luck, which is guaranteed to make you win your 50/50s. 50% of the time, it works 100% of the time. We've got a lot to cover, so let's vroom into how Mavuika works and discuss the insane things she can do, not the least of which being fighting enemies on a flaming motorcycle. Mavuika's kit is based on a unique mechanic called Fighting Spirit. As the Pyro Archon, Mavuika does not gain or use energy like the other characters do. Instead, her elemental burst charges up based on accumulating Fighting Spirit, which occurs when a character on your team spends Night Soul points, including Mavuika herself, or when they hit with a normal attack. We'll get into a lot more details about all of this when we talk about her burst, but just know that she works a little bit differently from the other characters in the game. So what are Mavuika's abilities and how do you use her? Let's start with her normal attacks. While very flashy and quite fast for a Claymore character, they're not necessary for her effectiveness and don't even need to be leveled up. But her elemental skill is quite important. The first thing it does is give Mavuika 80 Night Soul points upon activation. This is basically a little meter that depletes over time, ending the elemental skill once it runs out. Her elemental skill has two versions, and you can swap between each version by tapping the skill again. The tap version of her skill summons a ring behind your character that deals AoE Night Soul aligned pyro damage every 2 seconds. This skill also works when Mavuika is not the active character, allowing for some off-field pyro damage and application. But if you hold her skill instead, Mavuika will jump on her Flame Strider, which is a flying, swimming, climbing motorcycle that she will use to attack enemies. This form gives her unique, normal, charged, and plunging attacks that deal pyro damage that cannot be overridden by any other elemental infusion, and these bike attacks also have their own normal, charged, and plunge attack damage multipliers, which is why you don't need to level her regular normal attack talent. With two forms and the potential to be played on or off field, Mavuika has a lot of variability, and I'll go over how to get the best performance out of her for your needs in the playstyle section of this video. But for now, let's talk about her elemental burst, because it's not only incredibly flashy, but also incredibly powerful. Mavuika's burst is unique because it doesn't rely on energy, but instead uses another mechanic called Fighting Spirit. You gain Fighting Spirit when Mavuika or anyone else on the team consumes Night Soul points during combat. You can also gain Fighting Spirit when a party member hits an enemy with a normal attack, but you gain so little this way that it's barely worth mentioning. You need 100 Fighting Spirit to use her burst, but Mavuika can store up to 200 Fighting Spirit, and the more you have, the stronger your elemental burst becomes. Obviously, gaining Fighting Spirit is important, and Mavuika will want at least one other character that consumes Night Soul points in her team to consistently get the Fighting Spirit she needs. And I'll go over all the best options for her in the team section, but for now, let's talk about the two major ways Fighting Spirit impacts Mavuika's burst. Firstly, it makes Mavuika's initial burst hit stronger. The first hit of her burst is a really powerful nuke that can do devastatingly high amounts of damage, especially when Mavuika triggers a melt or vaporize reaction. And while she can use her burst with only 100 Fighting Spirit, you want to be closer to the cap of 200 Fighting Spirit because all of it will be consumed upon casting her elemental burst, and the more Fighting Spirit you have, the more damage she will deal. Secondly, the Fighting Spirit consumed while using her elemental burst will enhance her motorcycle state, giving her normal and charge attacks a huge damage buff based on the amount of Fighting Spirit consumed. Mavuika also gets perfect interruption resistance in this state, meaning that enemies can no longer knock her around, but she will still take damage from their attacks. This buffed motorcycle stance will last for 7 seconds, and it will be cancelled immediately if you switch off of her. For Mavuika's passive abilities, her first one unlocks after you ascend her past level 20, and it gives you a 30% attack buff for 10 seconds whenever a party member triggers a Night Soul Burst. This buff will permanently be up as long as you keep using Mavuika's skill, so it's a free 30% attack buff. Mavuika's second passive, which unlocks upon ascending her past level 60, will give the on-field character a damage buff after she uses her elemental burst. The damage buff provided by this passive increases by the amount of fighting spirit Mavuika consumes, up to a 40% damage buff if she uses 200 fighting spirit. This buff will decay over 20 seconds, so it really favors characters who can front load their damage instead of characters who take time for their damage to ramp up. When leveling up Mavuika's talents, you'll want to level her elemental burst and skill together, but prioritize her elemental burst for the massive damage it can deal. Even if you plan to use Mavuika solely as a support and off-field pyro applicator, it's worth leveling up her burst because it just hits that hard. So prioritize her burst, then her skill, and you do not need to level her normal attacks. Now that we've gone over how Mavuika works, I want to share some tips and special techniques about her various playstyles. You can play Mavuika as an off-field damage dealer and pyro applicator. For this playstyle, all you have to do is tap her skill, then switch to your other characters and let her rain down fire from off-field. And when you get 200 fighting spirit, unleash her elemental burst for a massive nuke of pyro damage. Even as an off-field character, Mavuika's burst can still hit so hard that it is worth using despite the long animation time. And while Mavuika is a nice off-field character, her true value shines through when she is played as an on-field carry. The initial hit of Mavuika's burst and the damage bonus she gets for the 7 seconds afterwards is so high that she will often outdamage many of the other carries that she is theoretically supposed to support. Playing Mavuika as an on-field damage dealer and carry is pretty easy. All you have to do is start by tapping her elemental skill, then switch to the rest of your team and use their elemental skills and burst to set up various team buffs before switching back to Mavuika and then using her elemental burst. After that, all you have to do is just hold down the attack button for 7 seconds and do Mavuika's enhanced motorcycle charged attack, aka doing donuts on your helpless enemies. The reason you use this setup is because Mavuika's motorcycle charge attack, aka the donut attack, is pretty fast, it has a big AoE that fits perfectly inside of Bennett's burst, and it deals the most damage inside of the 7-second window. What's also nice about this setup is that once you use Mavuika's elemental burst, you will automatically be on her motorcycle, so you don't ever have to hold her skill. Using this rotation will allow you to do very high damage with Mavuika, but there are some special techniques that you can use to deal even more damage by canceling part of your attacks. Just note that these special combos are for Vaporize and Melt setups, and they also require specific characters, so if you don't have or don't play these specific characters with Mavuika, then you can skip this section and use the timestamps to find a section that is more useful for you. With an off-field hydro damage dealer on the team, use 1 dash after every 2 charged attacks during Mavuika's elemental burst. So do 2 donut spins, then dash, then 2 donut spins, then dash, and repeat. This will get you 9 charge attack hits, which is 1 more than normal, and you will vaporize 5 out of those 9 hits for even more damage. On top of that, you'll also get additional damage from the 4 dash hits, because Mavuika's dash on her motorcycle actually does damage too. And the really exciting thing is that this combo allows characters like Xingqiu and Yelan to also work well with Mavuika. They were initially thought to not work well with her best combo, but if you do this, they actually work really well because the dash attack will trigger Xingqiu and Yelan's off-field burst damage while still allowing Mavuika to vaporize the much stronger charge attacks. This is great because it allows for more team flexibility with Mavuika, and all you have to do to make it work with Xingqiu or Yelan is just dash every 2 charge attacks while on Mavuika's motorcycle. The next of the special techniques are for melt teams. These setups are a bit tricky because of the timing required to do them, but you get several monstrous hits of damage as a payoff. The first setup is with Citlali, and this is actually easier to do with higher ping, so if your ping is around 100, you just have to do this regular combo, but if it's under 100, make sure you actually see the damage numbers appear, especially after the third charged attack hit, or you might do the combo too fast for this to actually work. So with Citlali on the team, you want to use your team buffs, switch to Citlali second to last, and then use her skill and burst, and then finally switch to Mavuika and use her burst. Then you want to use 3 charge attacks, and then release the charge attack button after you see the third hit, and that will cause Mavuika to jump off of her bike for a moment, and then come down for another big hit of damage, and then you want to dash immediately after that, and then repeat. This setup will get you more strong melt reactions with Mavuika, and it's a noticeable increase in damage, but it will take some practice, and you'll have to figure out the timing based on your ping. The next combo involves Kaeya, but this setup is the opposite of the previous one because you actually need really low ping to make this work. It's also much easier to do with C6 Kaeya, though it is possible with C0 Kaeya, it's just much less consistent. To do this combo, use Kaeya's elemental skill and then elemental burst just before Mavuika's burst, then do 2 charge attacks followed by a dash attack, then 3 charge attacks followed by a dash attack, then 4 charge attacks. Feel free to review this section as much as you need, and the combos will be on screen to help you practice. These advanced combos and special techniques will definitely elevate your Mavuika gameplay, but honestly, if you're just getting familiar with her, there is nothing wrong with just spamming her charge attack right after her elemental burst. And if thinking about special combo timing in the heat of battle sounds anxiety-inducing, let's talk about how to build Mavuika for massive damage, because with her kit, having the right build makes her insanely strong by default, and that makes her a lot less reliant on being played super sweatily. Since Mavuika can be played on or off field, she obviously has different artifact sets she wants, right? Well, not really. The 4-piece Obsidian Codex set is the best in slot for on-field DPS Mavuika, and it's also often the best choice for an off-field damage dealer build as well. The reason for this is because Mavuika's burst is just so strong that you definitely want to use it even if she's in more of a support role, and since you want to use her skill before her burst, it's really easy to meet the condition of the artifact set by consuming just 1 Night Soul point on the field to get an absurd 40% crit rate buff for her most powerful ability. However, if you're really looking to play Mavuika in more of a support role, then you can use the Scroll of the Hero of Cinder City artifact set as a nice support option. This will help buff your team's elemental damage, but the effects of this artifact set do not stack, so if another character is already using it, which is often the case in Mavuika teams, you're not going to get any extra benefit. And Mavuika doesn't need the energy from the 2-piece set effect, so it's oftentimes just better to use a 4-piece Obsidian Codex set on her anyways. And speaking of energy, let's talk about the stat priorities you'll want on Mavuika. One nice thing about her is that she doesn't need a single point of energy recharge because she doesn't use energy. So that means that even flat defense or flat HP substats are actually more useful on her than energy recharge is. Of course, you don't want flat HP or flat defense stats, but at least they have some use. Instead, you'll want crit rate, crit damage, attack percent, and elemental mastery on your artifacts. Aim for 40 to 60% crit rates. More than 60% crit rate is wasted because of the Obsidian Codex crit buff. Aim for about 200 crit damage, and aim for 1600 to 2000 attack, depending on which sands you're using. There can definitely be a degree of variability in your overall stats. Just as long as you aren't building a lot of energy recharge or overcapping on crit rate, you should be fine. For specific artifact pieces, you will want a crit damage circlet. You can run a crit rate circlet, but you are much more in danger of overcapping on crit rate if you do that, so crit damage is generally preferred. You'll want a pyro damage goblet, and either an attack percent or an elemental mastery sands. An elemental mastery sands will be slightly better if you're using Mavuika in a Vaporize or Melt team, but honestly there's not a massive difference, so just use whichever sands has better substats. Next, let's move on to Mavuika's best weapons. While Mavuika can use most claymores effectively, there isn't too much variance between them. Mavuika's signature weapon, 1,000 Blazing Suns, is unsurprisingly her best. It's about 25% better than other options, and it's just a great stat stick for her. After that, an R5 Serpent Spine and R1 Beacon of the Reed Sea are her second best options, each about 12% better than her best free-to-play weapon. After that, other 5-star weapons you might consider using on her, like Verdict or Redhorn, are only about 7% better than her best free-to-play option, and the Wolf's Gravestone is only about 1% better. And speaking of Mavuika's best free-to-play weapon, that would be the Mailed Flower. Unfortunately, this was an old event weapon that many players just will not have access to. So if you're one of those players, Mavuika's next best free-to-play weapon is the Tidal Shadow, the Fontaine Craftable Claymore. An R5 Tidal Shadow barely loses to the Mailed Flower, so it's a good option, but you need someone to heal Mavuika in order for its passive to work. But considering you'll pretty much always want to run Mavuika with Bennett or Xilonen, or both, this shouldn't be a problem. However, if you don't have a healer on your Mavuika team, then you can use the Earth Shaker, the Natlin Craftable Claymore. This weapon doesn't have a healing requirement to trigger its passive, but the craftable weapon from Mavuika's own nation is more than 10% worse than other free-to-play options, even at Refinement 5. Now that we've discussed how to build your Mavuika, let's look at her constellations to discover how much more powerful she can get. Spoilers, it's a lot. But don't let that persuade you into feeling like you need her constellations. Mavuika does not need any constellations or even her signature weapon to be really strong. But if you do want to know which is best for you and your playstyle, I will cover that in detail later in the video. For now, let's talk about her constellations and the overall value they provide. Mavuika's first constellation increases her maximum Night Soul points to 120 and lets her gain 25% more Fighting Spirit. It also gives her a 40% attack buff when she gains Fighting Spirit. This constellation is nice, but honestly a lot more helpful for an off-field Mavuika because it makes her skill last longer, increasing it from a 12-second duration to 18 seconds. But this constellation is not that powerful for an on-field Mavuika because she doesn't need the increase in skill duration, and she doesn't really need the Fighting Spirit boost either, unless you're running her without a good Natlin support, and then it can be kind of nice. But if you're in the situation where your Mavuika teams are not using a good Natlin support like Citlali or Xilonen, then your Mavuika teams and your account in general would benefit much more from having someone like Xilonen or Citlali rather than getting Mavuika's C1. Mavuika's Constellation 2, on the other hand, is incredibly strong and designed to be a temptation for people to spend. This constellation increases Mavuika's base attack by 200 while in the Night Soul state. This is already really crazy because outside of leveling a character a lot and getting them a better weapon, there's no way to increase a character's base attack, since all other attack boosts are considered attack bonuses and look at the base attack in order to calculate those bonuses. So her C2 is effectively like taking your weapon and adding 200 base attack to it, and there's still more that this constellation does. It also enables her tap skill to shred 20% of enemy defense, which is really nice, and it also makes her motorcycle's normal, charged, and plunging attacks deal 60, 90, or 120% more damage respectively. This is a very powerful constellation that will increase Mavuika's personal damage by more than 35%, so it's quite significant. Mavuika's third constellation increases her burst talent level by 3. It's a nice constellation, but hardly as impactful as her C2. Her fourth constellation makes one of her passives better. Instead of getting up to a 40% damage bonus for the active character, you can now get up to a 50% damage bonus, and this buff will no longer decay over time. However, this constellation seems a lot better than it actually is in practice. And that's because Mavuika's personal damage is very front-loaded, so the extra damage and removing the weakening effect of the buff doesn't really impact her that much. And while this does make Mavuika a nicer support option, by this point you've already unlocked her C2 and her C3, which will just make her so absurdly strong as an on-field damage dealer that playing her as an off-field damage dealer or support would be like the equivalent of nerfing yourself just for the fun of it. Mavuika's 5th constellation increases her skill talent level by 3, which is decent but nothing too special. Mavuika's final constellation basically enhances and combines both versions of her elemental skill. If you use the tap skill, her motorcycle will come to life and slam into enemies for 200% pyro damage every 2 seconds, or whenever the ring hits an enemy, even if Mavuika is off-field. And whenever Mavuika is riding her motorcycle, she'll also summon the ring that is generated by her tap skill, which will decrease opponents' defense by 20% and also deal 500% AoE pyro damage every 3 seconds. This constellation also brings some utility, allowing Mavuika to generate Night Soul points when she's not in combat. This will let you explore while riding on your flaming motorcycle for a bit longer. Overall, her C6 is a very strong constellation, but it's far from the strongest we've ever seen, and if you really want to supercharge your Mavuika, her 2nd constellation is the best stopping point. However, you really don't need any constellations on her because she's already great at C0. But if you are a player who has saved up for a while and want to invest into her, let's talk about the best investment for your playstyle. If you strictly want to play her as an off-field damage dealer and support for someone like Mualani, Chaska, or Kinich, her C1 is more valuable than her signature weapon, because it increases the duration of her elemental skill, her off-field damage, and her Ascension 4 passive buff for the active character. And it's also true that as an off-field damage dealer, Mavuika's Constellation 2 is still more valuable than her signature weapon, because it provides her about a 20% damage increase, while also providing the team about a 12% overall damage increase. So as an off-field damage dealer and support, it is much better to get Mavuika's Constellation 1 and 2 as opposed to getting her weapon. If you want to play Mavuika as a main DPS, on-field damage dealer, and carry, then you should not prioritize getting her signature weapon or her constellations. Instead, you should get another character that consumes Night Soul points quickly so Mavuika can generate a lot of fighting spirit. 2 great characters that can help in this regard are Xiaolonen and Citlali. Of the 2, Xiaolonen is a bit better since she consumes more Night Soul points faster and is still one of the best choices for Mavuika, even if Citlali is already on the team. And Xiaolonen is already an amazing support character on her own, so she adds a lot of value to your account as well. If you already have Xiaolonen, things get a little bit more nuanced. Getting Citlali and pairing her with Xiaolonen will buff your Mavuika team more than Mavuika's C1 will, but C2 Mavuika with Xiaolonen will be more damage than getting Citlali without Xiaolonen, and C0 Mavuika with her signature weapon, Xiaolonen and Citlali will be more damage than C2 Mavuika with just Xiaolonen. As you can see, depending on your situation, the investment value of Mavuika can be very situational, but for general recommendations, I would prioritize getting Xiaolonen for Mavuika, and then you can think about her weapon, constellations, or Citlali. Citlali will generally increase Mavuika's damage potential, allowing her to hit much higher numbers, but not as consistently. Citlali is best if you already have Xiaolonen and a strong weapon for Mavuika, like the R5 Serpent Spine. Getting Mavuika's C1 or C2, and or her signature weapon after getting Xiaolonen will make her personal damage a bit higher, but you won't see the same level of spike damage as you will with Citlali. My personal recommendation would be to aim for Xiaolonen and or Citlali instead of getting Mavuika's constellations or signature weapon, as this will not only be a very potent damage increase for Mavuika, but it will also give your account more flexibility since you have more characters. And speaking of characters that pair well with Mavuika, let's talk about her best teams and characters that you'll definitely want to play with her. I'll cover both her on-field and off-field playstyles, but I'll focus more on her on-field damage dealer teams because that's where you'll get the most value out of her. As an on-field damage dealer, Mavuika's best support is Xilonen. She spends Night Soul points very quickly and generates a lot of fighting spirit for Mavuika. On top of that, she can also shred enemies' elemental resistances and also increase your team's elemental damage through the Cinder City artifact set. Overall, Xilonen is pretty much everything Mavuika wants in a teammate, and I highly recommend using Xilonen with her. Mavuika's other best teammate is Bennett. While he doesn't generate any fighting spirit for her, he does provide a huge attack buff for her with his elemental burst that just so happens to be the exact same size as her motorcycle charge attack donuts. Bennett also enables Pyro Resonance for another attack buff and can further buff Mavuika's attack or elemental mastery depending on which artifact set he's using. And on top of all of that, he can heal Mavuika with his elemental burst too. After these two, the next general best character to pair with Mavuika is Citlali. She consumes Night Soul points to generate fighting spirit for Mavuika, on top of providing a shield, doing decent damage, shredding pyro resistance, and providing a ton of attack through the Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayer's buff. And of course, we can't forget her cryo application, which allows Mavuika to melt, which raises the Pyro Archon's damage potential by a lot. So if you have them, you'd want to run Mavuika with Xilonen, Citlali, and Bennett. But if you don't have all these characters, then you can use Furina in place of Xilonen or Citlali, and that'll work pretty well. Just make sure you're running Bennett for all of his buffs and also healing because you'll definitely need it if Furina's on the team. And if you're willing to learn the advanced techniques and special combos that I talked about earlier in the video, then Xingqiu and Yelan also make good teammates for Mavuika. Rosaria or C6 Kaeya can also be solid options for her, but it's a lot more tricky to make them work as enemy movement can really mess up Mavuika's melts and therefore damage potential. You can also use Sucrose and Kazuha as nice buffing characters here, and even Diona's C6 is a nice way to provide some extra elemental mastery for Mavuika. Kachina is usable with Mavuika since she consumes Night Soul points, but honestly Kachina doesn't really provide that much and it's definitely worth it to upgrade from Kachina to Xilonen, not just for Mavuika's teams but for your overall account as well. Another fun team and playstyle is Mavuika Overloaded with Chevreuse, Auroran, and Bennett. Auroran helps generate fighting spirit for Mavuika by using Night Soul points, and Bennett and Chevreuse are great team buffers. This isn't the best overloaded team out there, but Mavuika's high personal damage does help it a lot, and if you have several Constellations on the 4 stars, this team performs a lot better than people may expect. So there's a good variety of teams that you can play on-field Mavuika in, but the main thing you want to do is pair her with a support that consumes Night Soul points, like Xilonen or Citlali, then add Bennett, and then the last spot in the team is flexible for whoever you want that can provide extra damage or buffs. As an off-field character, Mavuika can work in just about any team that wants an off-field pyro damage dealer. She does not dethrone Xiangling, the queen of off-field pyro damage in application, but Mavuika doesn't need any energy, and Xiangling needs a ton, so she can be a more convenient option in teams that don't need Xiangling's fast pyro application. As an off-field damage dealer, she works well with Chaska, Mualani, and Kinich, and she also does well with Wriothesley and Neuvillette, and if you love overloaded teams with Chevreuse, she'll work there as well. She can even have some meme Burgeon teams that do quite well, although your Pyro Traveler is probably better suited to that role. Mavuika has a lot of potential as an off-field damage dealer, and even if you do not get the most value out of using her that way, she can be a fun option for a team that you already love. With that, you now have all you need to go out and thrash your enemies with the fury of 1,000 suns and one flying motorcycle. Mavuika is a very good character overall, and I find her a ton of fun to play, but I really dislike that she needs Night Soul consuming teammates to work effectively. Hopefully we'll get more free or easily accessible characters to pair with her in the future, but only time will tell. I hope this guide was helpful, and feel free to check out any of my other videos if so. This video took a lot of time and effort, so I really appreciate all the likes, subs, and nice comments. It really means a lot to me. That'll be it for this one, everyone. I love you, stay jawsome, and I can't wait to see you in the next one.